Mind Games, an analysis of John Lennon's handwriting. This is the second video I've made about the Beatles' handwriting. In my previous video, we saw that Paul McCartney's handwriting revealed him to be a friendly, emotionally stable and intelligent person, with a good imagination and a sense of humour, who became somewhat destabilised by his fame, especially with regard to his base human urges. His replacement, Billy, shared some of these qualities, but his handwriting revealed someone who has an attitude that is much more head over heart, with a very willful and determined demeanour. Now we turn our attention to John Lennon, to ask the question, what does his handwriting reveal about his mental state? We shall see that, judging solely by his handwriting, John was the inverse of Paul or Billy, and frankly, it's a small miracle that John ever achieved anything. This is a thank you postcard that John wrote to his Aunt Harriet at the age of 11. I think his Aunt Mimi probably insisted that he used a ruler to give himself lines to write on. I doubt he would have thought to do that himself. We shall see later that John normally had falling baselines when writing, but here they are straight, albeit artificially so. The size of his letters is average, and the upper, middle, and lower zones of his letters are balanced. These are all good signs, indicating composure and a sense of equilibrium between thinking about the past, present, and future, and also a balance between the world of his imagination and fantasy, his everyday life, and his underlying biological needs. The letter forming is simplified in quality and a little poor for an 11-year-old, but regular in form, indicating clear objective thinking. The slant of his words is mixed, both reclined and inclined, but mostly straight overall. This means that John had the capacity to be level-minded in his thinking on the surface, but with emotional instability just lurking underneath. The pressure of his writing is average and even, meaning he was neither aggressive nor shy in his behaviour, just confident. The speed is also average, which is fine, but probably imposed upon him through a direction to write neatly. The speed of writing is a measure of intelligence, patience, and deception. The quick-witted person will write fast without losing the style or quality of their letter forming. Losing that style or quality means the writer is merely impatient. Very deliberate and careful handwriting, which is slow, is a sign of deception. John wrote narrow letters with wide spaces between them. These spacings show a contradiction: the need for human contact, but also the need for psychological space. John's margins are even all round, which is good, showing an awareness of social boundaries and self-control. His letter strokes are a little wobbly and thread-like in places, despite an earnest attempt to be round. In truth, many of his strokes actually ended up being slightly angular on the connections, indicating some inner tension. Writers with these qualities want to preserve what has been established and don't like change that much. However, they are also quite creative and artistic, albeit with a slightly authoritarian outlook. John manages to write cursively here, which shows great cohesive and practical thinking. The connection choice has a tendency towards an arcade style, showing someone who aims at perfectionism, the sort of person who will rise to the top of their profession, but who secretly has arrested development emotionally. They can be stubborn, inflexible, and critical of others, which might drive loved ones away. John's personal pronoun I is a simple stick, demonstrating he was very independent, culturally aware, and lacking facade. His small letter D is one of the few, mostly constant and well-formed parts of John's writing. Its style features a high, retraced stem, showing a quiet pride and dignity. He is an independent-minded person who does not like to show his hurt feelings in public, at least not at the age of 11 years old. The eye dots here are either over the stem, meaning he is capable of being methodical, precise, and with a good memory and concentration, or to the right of the stem, indicating impatience. Overall, the impatience wins out. John's T-bars are midway up the stem and to the right, showing his impulsiveness, animation, and nervous energy. The ovals of his letters are a mixture of open and closed, meaning John could sometimes reveal too much verbally. Furthermore, it means that in one sense he was open and honest, and in another sense he was gullible. Typical of a young boy's handwriting, the lower extensions of his Y's and G's show a dreamy nature towards sex and sexuality. Thankfully, he signs off in a style that matches the rest of his writing, indicating sincerity. We have to question the content of the note, however. John writes that the personalized towel he was given is the best towel I've ever seen. Is he being sarcastic or genuine with that remark? I don't know. I doubt his aunt knew either. Here we are a few years on, and the writing hasn't really improved. It's possibly worse, since it's now disconnected with larger capitals. This is a page from John's childhood handmade newspaper, the Daily Howl, written at the age of around 12 or 13. Possibly John was trying to ape the typed text of a real newspaper, but, as we shall see, John often wrote in broken print writing, indicating disjointed thinking and someone who was too open to the influences of others. The illustrations are pretty dark in nature too. This is a Christmas letter from John to Cynthia, who, at this point, was still his girlfriend. The handwriting here is childish. The letter is 8 pages long. The first page, featured here, and the last page are charming illustrations of John and Cynthia together. Most of the pages in between are John obsessively writing "I love you, Cyn" over and over again. I haven't counted them, but in Cynthia Lennon's autobiography, she claimed that he wrote "I love you" to her 100 times in this letter. She found it very sweet. I'm glad she did. I find it neurotic and clingy. It's as though his deep feelings of inferiority are ameliorated through his relationship with Cynthia. I think with Cynthia, Yoko, and even May Pang, his female partners were mother figures as well as wives and girlfriends. I think he felt somehow validated by them. From Hamburg, John wrote to George's mother in 1960, with whom he was good friends. They shared a crazy sense of humor. John was reporting to her that he and the boys were all okay, in his own zany way, with a semi-made-up language which channels Lewis Carroll's Jabberwocky. Here the zones of his writing are balanced and even, but again this is an artificial thing, since they are all capitals. The baselines are straight because they are written on ruled paper. The slant has not changed. It still seemed mostly upright at first glance, but it's actually mixed, and as before this indicates an underlying emotional instability. Large heavy letters show off John's intense and extrovert nature. The spacing is mostly even, both between letters and between words, showing that at the time of writing he was in a good and relatively stable and methodical state of mind. Most of his words are written wide with no left or right margins, a sign of an extrovert with a lack of reserve. The speed is slow because the letters are not connected. Normally this shows a lower IQ. In this case, I think it's due to the crazy and made-up language of the letter. He is simply pausing to think creatively. The letter form quality is good, although simple. It is rounder than normal and regular in size. These features all point towards an open and orderly frame of mind. The strokes and shapes are still somewhat angular but rounder than usual, showing an easing of tension in his demeanor. The ovals are closed, which is a good sign. It shows tact and thoughtfulness, rather than blurting everything out or being too heavily under another person's influence. These are both qualities we will see in his handwriting later on. The personal pronoun I shows an independent person, but less so than before. With this personal pronoun I, he shows an appreciation of bonding with others. The T bars are absent due to the capitalization of everything, but the I dots are circles, and they are present despite the fact that they aren't even needed. They are difficult to interpret. They can show an interest in arts or crafts. They can show a faddish or superficial artiness. In a man's handwriting, they are normally a feminizing trait. However, I just think he was being silly. There are some small letter Y's, even though they aren't needed either because he's printing in capitals. They show the wishful, unfulfilled sexual fantasy that was starting to show in his previous handwriting style. At the end of this crazy letter, John signs off with simply his first name, in letters matching the rest of the text. Again, this is good. It means he is sincere. Finally, he finishes with some fun, surreal doodles at the bottom. Here is an example of John's usual print writing. It is a short autobiographical piece written when he was 20. Even though he's writing on squared ruled paper, note the falling baseline. He was clearly very depressed. Note also the bottom part where it says, written a couple of songs with Paul. Not written 100 songs with Paul, just a couple. He also has a simple ambition, to be rich, which is underlined. I'm not sure who the intended reader was here, but his naked ambition probably didn't help him with promoters. This is John's normal signature, taken from his immigration paperwork that allowed him to work in Hamburg. It's not like the autograph we came to know later. It's sensible, orderly, calm and controlled. Even so, it still has an artistic flair and warmth. I know you can't make out much of this, but it doesn't matter. I've only included this example to demonstrate the layout of John's words on the paper. The baselines are straight, and the margins, although always present, vary wildly. This letter was written over several days, and his change of mood really shines through. Sometimes he's thinking of the past, sometimes he's thinking about the future, and sometimes he's just plain restless and frustrated. This is a poem that John wrote at the age of 25. Here, finally, we can see something approaching John's normal cursive adult handwriting. The zones are balanced, denoting some equilibrium in his thinking and attitude towards different aspects of his life. He is attempting to keep the baseline straight, but it's still slightly falling at the ends, so there's still an undercurrent of depression here. The pressure is both heavy and shaded, indicating a greater intensity to his character. The green pen is an interesting and somewhat eccentric choice. The size of his letters is slightly large, showing him to be an outgoing extrovert. The wider spacing within his words also reflects this. The spacing between his words, however, is narrower, as is the distance between the lines. This closeness demonstrates his need to dominate the psychological space around him. The speed of the writing is average, which in John's case is good, because he has a tendency to rush things. The rhythm is regular, due to the writing being fully connected. This is the sign that someone doesn't like to be interrupted. The letter form quality is mostly good, with only some letters rushed and running into each other, e.g. the word the. This shows that John can be methodical in his approach to things if he wants to. The capital P with a spiked top is known as the argumentative P. People who include this in their writing are the sorts of people who like a fight and won't back down. Another letter of interest is the F of practicality, with its big top loop. People who use this have many theories, but don't usually follow through on them. The strokes and shapes are both round, which usually means friendliness, but with triangular connections, denoting someone who is an idealist, who doggedly hangs on to decisions beyond the point of reason. The ovens are open at the top, the sign of someone who is talkative, generous, honest, but can be tactless. The personal pronoun I has an upper loop without a base. This again indicates that idealism and ethical principles are important to him. There is a need for self-protection, and this style of letter shows that he was greatly influenced by his early life experiences. Interestingly, it is also formed like a 9. John was born on the 9th of October, and for many reasons, he considered the number 9 to be special to him. The T-bars are of the shape and stem loop with no bar type. This means he was hypersensitive and had deep emotions without the discipline or reason to handle them. His I dots are high, showing his imagination and enthusiasm. There are more loops here than in other examples of his handwriting, which is good, but they aren't finished, especially on the Y loops. This demonstrates an unrealistic and wishful attitude towards his sexual expectations, which are often unfulfilled. The lower extensions are also varied, indicating excitability and a lack of control. Once again, the slant of his handwriting is a mixture, but more declined overall, meaning he was looking to the past with either a sense of caution or a quiet repression. People who use this slant have past issues connected to their mother that are unresolved. They usually also have absent fathers. The smaller writing on this postcard to Ringo, with more regularity in letter form, size, spacing, etc., shows that John can rein himself in when he wants to. He has included 2 fake haikus. Real haikus are 3 lines long, consisting of 5 syllables, then 7, then 5. John's first attempt at a haiku has 3 lines with 6 syllables each, thus encoding 666. The second fake haiku has 3 syllables, then 3, then 8. The address uses writing that matches the meaning of the words. Bear in mind that John specialized in lettering at art school. Given the state of his basic handwriting, it's no wonder that he got kicked out. Writing England, rather than England, on a postcard sent from Japan could be seen as being a bit insulting to the poor Japanese postal staff who will have handled his mail. Likewise, making a boob out of the U of UK is either a bit childish or funny, depending on your points of view. This second postcard to Ringo a year later has handwriting that is very childish and chaotic. The middle zones of the letters here dominates up to the last 2 lines, when the lower zone dominates instead. The upper zone being small shows an absence of higher and creative thinking. It's a sign of greed, materialism and sensuality. The dominant mid-zone means John has difficulty in delaying pleasure. He lacks mature detachment and philosophical attitudes. A dominant lower zone shows an overwhelming of unconscious drives, such as sex, money, and a need for variety. If security needs become an issue for someone like this, then neurotic infantilism creeps in. The obvious baseline indicates depression, fatigue, and disappointment. It also shows obstinacy and determination in thinking, which is often destructive. The slant is, once again, very mixed and unstable. It is inclined and reclined in equal measure, which means he had unsettled and inconstant moods and thoughts. There is a swinging here between repression and depression. The slant can also demonstrate an undisciplined and fickle nature, maybe even lacking common sense. A person with this handwriting feels socially inferior, but is trying to hide it. The pressure of the pen is hard to determine because he's using a felt tip pen, but it's probably not super heavy or the ink would have bled. A medium heavy pressure shows someone who applies energy to everything they do. They are sentimental in nature and express themselves warmly. The writing is large and becomes larger by the end. This is the writing of someone who wants to make an impression and win recognition. He enjoys attention and admiration and doesn't like being alone. This is also the writing of someone who could be bold, even boastful, but still reckless and lacking concentration and discipline. The variable nature of the script also shows someone who is childish, moody, immature in nature, although often with an odd air of charm about them. Spacing in this writing tends to oscillate. The wide lettering demonstrates an extrovert on the surface, someone who appears to be outgoing but is secretly uptight. This is the handwriting of someone who is friendly one minute and withdrawn the next. Someone with this writing will take their unfulfilled love and sex life ideals and transpose them into the realm of imagination. Contrast this with the constant medium distance between his words. They imply a social maturity and intelligence. They say he can be organized, flexible, and objective, but then the gaps creep in, leading to more extravagant behavior. The wide distance between the lines shows the need for psychological space and possible trust issues. The margins are only maintained properly at the top, indicating the need to talk and possible depression. The speed here is quick, maybe rushed, so he is spontaneous but careless. The rhythm and form quality is poor, simplified, even neglected at times. These qualities are a sign of a neurotic immaturity. There is an inner personal disorganization and a lack of self-awareness and discipline. Neglected scripts and falling lines also mean he had suicidal tendencies. His strokes and shapes are a confusing mixture of round, angular, and threaded lettering. Big arcaded formations are common. We see these in people who are dramatic, theatrical, and want attention. They have a big imagination, with a pronounced creative ability and pride. Despite this, they are often covering feelings of inferiority. The loops of his letters are often absent, but when they are present, they are big, an indication of excessive emotional need. The ovals here are both open and closed. Closed ones show tactful, diplomatic behavior in verbal expression. When they are open, they mean he was emotionally open, but also gullible, with the tendency to reveal too much verbally. Some of his E's are also blind, showing some secrecy. With the exception of the phrase, you and yours, the leads in and out of the letters are mostly absent, which is a sign of very direct thinking. Arcaded connections here also show him to be someone who was running on instinct, rather than reason. They are found in the writing of people who are involved in covering up and hushing up the truth, not because they are liars, but because they've allowed themselves to be manipulated into a position where such a thing was necessary. The writing is mostly not connected and makes use of printing letters. We see this in people who gain their opinions from feelings rather than facts and logic. These people do have great imagination, though, and can be quick thinking, but they can also be impractical and might have violent outbursts. The print writing in particular indicates someone who is rebellious and an antisocial loner. The mixing styles is, once again, a sign of mental and emotional instability. The upward pointing triangle on descending letters shows someone who is searching for the answers to inexplicable things, someone who leans towards mental aggression, idealism, and stubborn thinking. A returning feature is his small letter D. It's high-stemmed and retracted, indicating a quiet pride and dignity, an independent person who doesn't want to show his hurt feelings in public. The T-bars, as usual, are midway up and to the right of the stem. This shows some more impulsiveness, animation, and nervous energy. His eye dots are close and either over the stem or slightly to the right. The mixture of the two shows signs of impatience. The lower zone's letters Y and G have extensions that plunge down. They show determination, firmness, aggression, maybe even defensiveness. The leaning and curving to the left is a sign of leaning to the past. There is a dependency on others for sexual strength here. The odd use of capitals revealed John to be a rebel, but also unstable. Finally, as silly as his signing off is, it actually shows a signature that matches the rest of the text, and this, as ever, means he is not a liar. This postcard to Julian shows more of the same writing style as in the last postcard, albeit less wild. I've included it simply because, of all the letters and postcards to Julian, it was the only one I found where John signed off as Daddy, written clearly. Normally his signing off as Dad or Daddy is a complete mess, as though he were trying to hide his identity as Julian's father due to guilt or shame. Now let's look at some handwritten song lyrics. I've chosen Beautiful Boy because here we see a return to the handwriting style from before he was famous. The zones are balanced and the bass line is straight. There was a great deal of mental and emotional composure here, which is really good to see. The slant is still mixed, but with a genuine attempt to be upright. This corresponds to John trying to remain calm, reasonable and practical despite himself. The pressure is average and the size is slightly large, but within normal range. This is someone who is not aggressive, but still confident. He is open and warm too. He writes mostly wide letters, so he still has an air of showmanship about him. The spacing between the words is average though, which is good. It demonstrates social maturity, intelligence and inner organization. The margins are also maintained all the way around the page, another sign of awareness of social boundaries and self-control. The speed of John's writing is faster due to the connectivity of words. This literally shows joined-up thinking. The form quality is higher too, with arcade connections. John is now more stable in his thinking, but still a little self-protective. His strokes and shapes still include ovals that are mostly open. He is likewise open and talkative, but still with that air of gullibility. The mix of arcade and garland strokes with a few threaded ones show that his changeable nature is still there. It's just being kept down. The T-bars are of the shape and stem loop with no bar type. This means he was still hypersensitive and had deep emotions. His eye dots are high and to the left of the stem, meaning he is cautious at this time. His small letter D still shows a quiet pride and dignity. However, that argumentative P is still present. His capitals are simple, of normal size, and match the rest of the text, demonstrating maturity. In short, this is the same emotional John that he has always been, but now he has finally learned some self-control and gained a bit of inner peace. It's a deep shame that just as he finally pulled himself together, emotionally and psychologically, he was killed. Possibly that was part of the reason why he was killed, as, in this state, he was more of a threat to the status quo. A whisper quote from the 2023 version of Memoirs states that just before he was shot, John was ready to tell the world the truth about the Beatles. As I've worked through the examples of his handwriting, I've often wondered whether any of them were written whilst John was high or drunk. If they were, it would certainly explain a lot. One last honourable mention. I don't know when this note to George Martin was written, but it's very revealing. It says, "I wrote Please Please Me alone. It was recorded in the exact sequence in which I wrote it. Remember?" If you're familiar with the I'm a Phony videos, you might recall seeing this note. I think of the quotation marks around the word remember as the handwritten equivalents of a sly wink. I hope you've enjoyed this tour through the many handwritings of the very emotional John Lennon. Join me next time for the calmer handwriting of George Harrison. Goodbye, and thanks for watching.